Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. There are many people who have experienced trauma in their lives, but may be reluctant to explore therapy as an avenue towards healing. Maybe what happens in therapy or the mystique behind the types of therapy have held you back. Our next guest is going to demystify the types of techniques used in therapy such as EMDR, cognitive behavior therapy, regression therapy, and sound biblical counsel. Dr. Ramona Probasco is the author of Healing Well and Living Free from an Abusive Relationship, Moving from Victim to Survivor to Overcomer. She holds a doctorate in psychology and has conducted extensive research in the area of domestic violence. She's a marriage and family therapist, a certified domestic violence counselor, and a nationally certified counselor. She's been in private practice for over 20 years. She's an expert and sought-after speaker on domestic violence and how to authentically heal well from the trauma it causes. As a personal overcomer of domestic violence, she offers guidance and insights to others based on both her clinical experience and her own experience of moving from victim to survivor to overcomer. She's the mother of 3 incredible adult children and 2 wonderful adult children through remarriage, and she now thoroughly enjoys being the wife of a husband who absolutely adores her. You can find her online at healingwellandlivingfree.com. Welcome to Dr. Ramona Probasco, our featured guest on the 3rd Monday of every month at the 10 o'clock hour. Dr. Ramona, so wonderful to see you again.
It is great to be back, Rabbi. Thank you for having me.
We are delighted to have you as a part of the Igniting Nation family and as a featured guest on the program. I think that the whole idea of recovering from abuse is something that statistically you've shared before how many women and how many men are victims of abuse and find themselves wondering, what do they do with it? How do they get through it? And so many turn to drugs, many turn to alcohol, many turn to suicide, many turn to divorce, many turn to kind of stuffing it and trying to make the best of it, but then exhibiting behaviors which are not life-fulfilling. And there are alternative therapies for that. But if you ask the average person about going to counseling, there seems to be a little bit of a stigma. And I think part of that stigma is they don't really know what therapy is all about. They see the 12-step process, or they see a movie, and they see NA or AA, or they have that in their mind as that's how counseling and therapy, or there's a couch and there's a psychiatrist and there's a lot of ahas, a lot of shaking your heads, and a lot of note-taking. They just don't really understand the process. And so I thought, because the holidays are coming up and there's people who are struggling and wondering what they're going to do, their family has said to them, listen, you've been traumatized, you've gone through an abusive situation. We can only be of some temporary comfort to you, but you really do need to get some help. And they probably don't know what that help looks like, where to go, what's going to happen. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the various kinds of therapies that there are, what they do, how they work, and what kind of effectiveness they have, which might make the average person a little bit less reluctant to want to seek out a professional. I've gone through professional counseling. I found it incredibly beneficial, but I'm the exception and not the norm. And I find that there's many people out there that are the walking wounded, PTSD, suffering from abusive relationships, mentally, emotionally, physically, but yet they carry those problems with them. They take it out on their family, friends, and children, and they really do need a helping hand. They just don't know what that looks like.
That's exactly right. And I thank goodness, I do believe some of that stigma is shifting and people are becoming more open to the idea of reaching out to professional help. And what I always tell a new client in that initial appointment, I always congratulate them for the courage, because it does. I mean, I've been in that position. I've been the client, during my own time of healing and trying to put my life and heart back together again. And I remember how scary that was to walk into an office and to sit with a person I've never met before and to share with them some of the most painful parts of one's life. So I always tell a client, way to go, Yahoo, that you made it to this place. So that's the first thing. Secondly, what I always tell people is that time in and of itself will not heal emotional wounds, let alone physical ones. If I were to break my arm, time would not heal it. It would go back together, but it wouldn't heal properly. It's the same thing with brokenness of your spirit or of your heart, if you will. And the fact of the matter of that is that trauma rewires our actual brain. So we have a physiological change that takes place when a person is traumatized. So if I would not try to fix my own car, why would I try to fix my own emotional well-being? But again, getting past some of the stereotypes and just when you don't know, when someone doesn't know what it's all about, we can kind of try to fill in the missing pieces, if you will, to try to determine what we think it's like. So there are many types of therapies. And what I tell people before you even decide on a particular, because most people don't know different therapeutic approaches, what I believe is one of the most important things when it comes to this particular issue of intimate partner violence or domestic abuse, domestic violence, is that you seek out someone that has specific training in working with this type of trauma. There are many different types of things that people can go through and different, ways trauma presents itself. I don't work with all of them. My niche is domestic abuse survivors as well as perpetrators. I worked several years with perpetrators and I still will. But my particular niche is I focus on working with the victims. So that's the first thing I tell people. The second thing I tell them is when you're looking for a therapist, don't be afraid, don't hesitate to ask that prospective therapist, do you have training? If so, how did you obtain your training? How long have you been working with domestic abuse survivors and perpetrators? Hopefully they've had an opportunity to work with both. But if you've been victimized like this, you want to know that that person understands the complexities of this issue. The next thing that I would ask them is, do they advise couples counseling? Because that to me is a litmus test if they really understand what they're doing. If they suggest that you work with your offender, then that's not the person you want to go to because couples counseling is unwise and unsafe. So that's something that I suggest people just bounce it off that prospective therapist and see their position on that.
So we're talking about in the case of physical abuse, couples counseling is not recommended for the spouse who's been abused and their abuser, whether it's male or female, that's not the environment that's going to bring about healing for the victim.
Well, I actually, I have an assessment tool that I use to screen, and if a couple comes in initially as a couple and that's what they're seeking, as I interview them and then I meet with them each individually, I will screen for this to determine if abuse is taking place in the relationship. And if so, then I do not advise couples counseling. I don't, it's just not safe, regardless if it's physical or not, because not all abuse, of course, presents itself in a physical fashion. But verbal, emotional, sexual, spiritual abuse, where a person maybe has never had a hand laid on them, but words or the Bible or other types of money, has been used to leverage power and control, that person is not going to feel comfortable dialoguing in a couple setting and being open. Plus, the ride home, you don't know what it's going to be like for that person now that their partner has privy to what you shared. So I personally take it outside the realm of physical and I include all forms of abuse. And at that point, I do not believe that it's safe to bring them together and to work with them.
I want to confirm that from my own experience that when I went through the betrayal that I went through, that it was determined by the board that uh, there was counseling that was going to be required, and in the initial visit, it was determined that there was to be two separate counselors, that there would not be uh, couples counseling, that these were issues that needed to be separated, and the individual should be safe to tell their own story in their own way and reflect on it and interact separately. And if at some point in the future that the two counselors felt that there was going to be any benefit to a couples counseling and that there could be some resolution, they would recommend that, but that never, we never arrived at that point. It was very clear and definitive that it was irrevocably broken and could not be fixed, and that was due to a non-couples counseling environment.
Right, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So assessing and properly diagnosing is so important for the clinician to conduct that so that they are not misdiagnosing. Because people will come in often and they'll describe, even if they're not coming in as a couple, a person who is being traumatized in this manner often will call it couple conflict. We just had a big fight. We need to learn how to communicate better. Well, all those things are probably true, but that's not descriptive of abuse. Abuse is about power and control because all couples disagree, but not all couples experience abuse. So determining what's really happening so that you carry out a proper treatment plan is, I can't underestimate how huge that is, how important that is.
So where do you determine what therapies you employ in what situations? Because you have at your command a number of different proven methods, some more recent than others that have been developed over time, some going back to the Psych 101, and some which are more evolved based on efforts in treatment of PTSD and other uh, uh, issues that affect a broader spectrum of not just couples, but people in the military, people who are in life-threatening situations or have been traumatized and fall into the PTSD spectrum.
Well, before I want to answer that question, however, I want to preface it with this. Once a person is determined that this prospective therapist has adequate and proper training, the next thing that is vital is that when you physically meet with that therapist, that you sense that the client feels a sense of connection and that they can trust this person and that they feel safe. Because a therapist can have all sorts of different treatment modalities that he or she may be trained to do with the client. But if that client does not feel what we call in psychology the Therapeutic Alliance, meaning the connection between the therapist and the client, if they don't sense that feeling of trust and safety, it doesn't matter what type of modality that clinician uses, that client is not going to be able to receive it. So it's important that the client is true to themselves and that they're willing to say, does this feel like a good fit? And likewise, I tell a new client, I may not be the best fit. Certainly, I've been through this. I've written this book. I have a ton of training in this area. However, my personality, my disposition, my approach in counseling may not be the best fit for you. And I want what's the best fit for you personality-wise as well. So that's something that I believe is also very important to be in place.
So is that really the beginning of finding a comfort level on the client side, is that they take an active role in this process, that they too are evaluating They just haven't made an appointment with somebody they were referred to, and now they show up and they're expected to accept and enter in that they should play an active part, the same way they would choose a cancer specialist or a heart specialist, that they might want to visit more than one practice or more than one doctor in order to ensure that they have the right comfort level.
That's exactly right. I mean, I have on a few occasions taken our vehicle to different mechanics because I just, what I call, don't have a good gut feeling, and so I'll shop around. So if I'm doing that with my car, why would I not do that with myself? That's, and a quality seasoned therapist is not going to take offense to that, even if they're not necessarily seasoned, but they just really, their client is who they're putting first and not their own ego. They'll be okay if this client says, I want to ask you a few questions. I'd like to interview you, or I'd like to meet with you and see if we're a good fit. And some clients, many will not even know to do this. This is what I educate people on. But so that then to me, it's up to the therapist to realize what needs to be in place for therapy really to work well. And so it can't be about the money; it has to be about the person, and not just collecting a session fee, so to speak.
Right, right. I think some of that moves it into you do have some self determination, you do have some control over the situation, and because you find yourself feeling that you are in need of professional help does not make you weak, it does not make you deficient, it doesn't make you defective, and you can play an active role. It is the same as you have cancer. It doesn't make you weak, it doesn't make you defective, it doesn't make you uh, uh, um, uh, not involved in your own treatment process. We stigmatize in some way this area that they call mental health, uh, and even uh, the insurance companies and the tracking systems. If you are even have a conversation, depression comes up, there's a notation, a diagnostic, and it's now categorized by the various coding companies and the insurance companies, and they seem to have attached, from an actuarial standpoint, a different uh, a different classification, if you will, of someone that falls into that category. So there are some, not societal, but some systemic or systematic things. I know that 5 years ago I needed something to help me sleep because I couldn't shut off my mind, and the doctor put down insomnia due to depression and anxiety. And all of a sudden, I was now in this classification of depression and anxiety, and it showed up on every single record, even after the period of time stopped where the medication was being given. And I said, stop putting that on the chart. I'm no longer being treated for that. It needs to go away. I don't want that carrying that with me, not because I have a problem with it. It certainly was what I needed at the time and what I took for the time for depression, but I don't take that anymore. Therefore, it's no longer current diagnosis. It's a prior diagnosis, and I don't want to be looked at as having a pre-existing condition of depression just because you don't keep your records up to date. And so I made a pretty big stink out of it with the doctor, saying, this is 5 years ago. Why is this still on when my chart comes up? Why is it still a diagnosis? Because it was, if I break my leg, okay, and it's now healed, I'm not going to be diagnosed with a broken leg for the rest of my life.
Right. Right, exactly. Well, we are not our diagnoses.
Right.
It's what a person has. It's not who they are. And it's interesting. I was having a conversation recently with someone where they were talking about how often people will refer to it as my anxiety, my depression. I am bipolar. versus this is the condition I have. They're making it who they are rather than separating it as meaning what they have. And it passes. What depression, we're not, of course, we're meant to heal, regardless if it is a broken bone or if it's rewired brain. Thank God now with today they've discovered that our brains are meant to heal. It's not we have a brain injury and it's done. No, just like the rest of our body, God created it to heal. It's the same thing with our brains. And to me, therapy is a way of healing things that we can't, the mind, if you will. And trauma causes brokenness in that regard, but it does not have to be, certainly is not meant to be or have to be permanent. There's ways we can heal.
I think the stereotypical therapy session that someone might look at is I go in and I talk to somebody for an hour and then they give me suggestions or homework or a book to read. I don't think that they have a full grasp on the fact that there are prescribed treatments, there are a number of different options that the therapist can use based on what it is you're exhibiting, experiencing, what they learn from you, what you respond to, and maybe you can share some of those particular options with us, because I hear the initials EMDR, I look up, it's eye movement, but not really understanding the process of what it is and how it works and how it helps to reprogram the mind. And it's been one of the therapies that seems to be catching on and moving people toward some resolution. Help me understand what that's about.
Well, what my approach typically working with the domestic abuse survivor is I come at it from several different angles. One is after I do everything I just got done sharing with you as far as helping them to feel safe and empowering them, then I give them an opportunity to, at their own pace, share their story with me. The reason for that is one of the most important things, Rabbi, that we can do for people who have been traumatized by someone they love and they thought they could trust, is to believe them that this is what they went through. And so giving them that opportunity to share their story, acknowledging that I believe them, giving them the vocabulary to use to call it what it is, and then to begin that education process that they didn't cause it, they didn't provoke it. We are all responsible for how we respond, regardless if it's in a marriage, a dating relationship, a professional relationship. I'm responsible for how I respond to another person, regardless of how much they may be irritating me. So, but in conjunction, of course, my book walks through all the different steps I do with people in a counseling setting, but I do encourage support group. I have an organization I work with here in California that specifically is a nonprofit that provides all sorts of support for DV survivors. And one of the things is support group, because a person cannot get from a group setting what they can get from individual counseling, as well as vice versa. What someone can gain in individual counseling, they're not going to get in group. So I advise my client to do group counseling, which most of them will do, or group support, I should say. Then you mentioned EMDR several times.
Mm-hmm.
That is one of the most evidence-based treatment approaches to use with trauma that exists. Okay, and I personally do not. I have training in EMDR, but I did not go through the whole extensive, to get certified in it. So what I do at that point is I show my clients how they can go about to find a properly trained EMDR therapist. And that training, that certification is called EMDRIA, and I'll spell it so people can write it down. It's EMDRIA. If they Google that, they can put in their zip code and find someone who has the full extent of EMDR training. I've gone to conferences and there are people that have left those workshops and have started using it. But for me personally, I would want the entire EMDR certification to go through all of it to actually use it with clients. So I will refer my clients to an EMDR certified EMDR therapist. And I will do that after the client feels comfortable with me. We got a rhythm going. They feel safe. We're working through the different steps that I walk them through in the healing well process. And then I encourage them to start to work with an EMDR therapist. In my opinion, if you do that too soon, before they feel that, before they kind of have some roots, and they feel comfortable with you, I feel like it's kind of risky. They need to have that safe place. I don't believe EMDR alone is the best approach. I believe that talk therapy plus EMDR plus a group support for DV survivors is the perfect, or maybe not perfect, the ideal combination to address this trauma.
Interesting. We're talking with Dr. Ramona Probasco, author of Healing Well and Living Free from an Abusive Relationship, from survivor to overcomer. She appears here on the third Monday of every month at the 11 o'clock hour. Not only is she a family therapist, marriage therapist, certified domestic violence counselor, nationally certified counselor, but also has been an experienced person who has gone through an abusive relationship and come out on the other side of it. So it's not all theoretical. It is actually very practical and based on her own experience and her own healing process, and brings a unique empathy to her practice. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about other techniques and other therapies and how therapy sessions work, to try to talk about this holiday season of maybe this holiday season brings out something in you that makes you feel, or a family member says, you might want to talk to somebody about that, finding out what's available for you and what some of the techniques are. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Shalom, I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and I've got a question for you. What do you think they're doing with your DNA? Oh, that 23andMe kit that you sent off, and you got back that report that told you you were Irish, you were French, you were Jewish? Wonder who's interested in that information. It's not like you've sent it off to a database with millions of other people and they can steal your identity, and who would really be interested in that information other than you? Well, maybe your friends and family, but there's one, yes, one, who is so interested in your DNA that it would be something that would make you afraid. And that is Satan himself. Why would Satan be interested in your DNA? Because there is a Y chromosome marker that determines whether or not you are in the line of Aaron. That's right, the biblical line of Aaron the priest. That's because if the priesthood comes back and the high priest takes his role as the head of the Sanhedrin, they will be the ones to call for the return of Jesus. Well, what can they do with your DNA? Well, there are 40-plus countries weaponizing DNA today. And imagine if Satan could weaponize your DNA and use that Y chromosome marker to take out the line of the high priest, then Jesus doesn't come back. That is the plot behind the best-selling book, The Codex, now out in second edition on Kindle, $2.99, also available in paperback. This is a biblical thriller beyond comparison that's going to take you on an incredible journey to understand what they could do with your DNA. I also want to encourage you to visit our website, ignitingnation.com, and click on special offers. There you're going to find the yellow cover of this book, The 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. We're going to take you on a journey in the Garden of Eden to the seed, the ground, all the way out to the fruit that reveals things of the natural that God is trying to reveal supernatural truths. Contained within these pages are 7 laws and 7 lessons within each law. They're going to take you on an incredible journey of understanding about the life you live and the fruit you bear. I want to encourage you to click on that yellow cover. We're going to ask for your email. Now, we won't send you spam because spam is not kosher, but we will send you the first chapter of this book. I want to encourage you to get 7 Laws of Abundant Living Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Barnes & Noble. You can get it at Books A Million, wherever great Christian books are sold. Take this journey with me to the Tree of Life in the Garden of Eden and to the Tree of Life we see again at the River of Life. Get your copy today. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Dr. Ramona Probasco, author of Healing Well and Living Free from an Abusive Relationship, from Victim to Survivor to Overcomer. Dr. Ramona, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Rabbi. I enjoy these conversations we get to have every month.
Well, thank you. I always look forward to them myself. Dr. Ramona, I can only look at my own circumstance where I went to a counselor who referred me to a psychiatrist and said, you can either go to a psychiatrist or you can go, if your family physician will take my recommendation that you need some help to get over this hump that you're on. And I said, well, I'd rather go to my family doctor than to a psychiatrist. I don't feel that I have a psychiatric ongoing problem. I just have this heartbreak and this horrible betrayal, and I need to work through it, and I need the biblical counsel I'm getting, but I'm also having trouble sleeping and mood control and feeling desperate, not suicidal, but just kind of, I was 62 years old, facing having to start life over at 62. It's not like I was in my 30s or 40s. And so that was kind of daunting and overwhelming. And so I went and shared the conversation with my local physician, my family doctor, and he said, yes, this is what I prescribe, what I prefer for depression, and here's what I'd like to put you on for sleep aid. And my statement to him was, I'm not going to be on this for very long. I'm going to get this talked through, I'm going to get this prayed through, and I'm going to come back to you and I'm going to tell you I want off of it. And he said, well, that's exactly what I'm hoping will take place. This is not something that I expect you to be on for a very long period of time. So the Christian view would be well, God can heal me, and why do I need to take medication? That's the same question a lot of people have, and we look in some extreme areas that don't treat cancer, they don't treat diabetes, and they wind up with people dying. Some people certainly are healed, but how do we approach that? How do we delicately approach that and encourage people to embrace the full spectrum of help that's available to them?
It's a great question. And I do believe, right before we went to the break, I was answering the question about what I believe is kind of an ideal approach to treating this form of trauma. And I need to mention the fact that, yes, having a medical evaluation, whether it be PTSD, depression, anxiety, all the above, that a person may be dealing with, that the medical component of working with a doctor is enormous, and having that proper evaluation to determine if medication is necessary is very important. And I think really, Rabbi, the fact that Jesus, when he was choosing his 12 apostles, that one was a doctor was not a mistake, and I say that kind of tongue in cheek. Of course it wasn't, the Lord chose a physician. Now, how they went about it back then, they didn't have psychotropic medications, but they did use a medical approach to treat ailments. And even with Jesus, we see in some occasions he spoke to a person, they were healed. Another occasion, someone touched his garment. Another occasion, he puts mud on someone's eyes. Even the Lord used different modalities to bring about healing in people's lives. So to think that medication is not something that is Christian, to me, is just, that really is missing a big aspect of how God, what he works through to bring about healing in a person's life. So working, whether it be with your general practitioner, if they are really studied up on psychotropic medications, a psychiatrist. Some of my clients will go to their OBGYN because that particular doctor is well versed on treating things like depression, anxiety, and like you said about insomnia being a symptom of those. So I encourage people, please do not be closed-minded to this. Be open to this. It is something that it's a tool, just like the EMDR or the different types of cognitive behavioral therapy, different approaches to treating, in counseling. This is just another one of them. And so I tell people, please be open-minded. It can be exactly what you need to help you to get to that next step of healing.
As we look at these discussions that take place, and talk therapy is really the, I guess if that's the primary course of sessions, there's regression therapies and there are other therapies, but the more common is talking through with a therapist that can talk to you about how you're processing information, bringing out expressions, having somebody to talk to about it. How does that dialogue work? How is that facilitated? Is it really the classic, there's a notebook and, how do you feel today? And maybe what would take place during a session so that we can demystify this for our audience?
Mm-hmm. Well, approach that I've used for years in quote unquote talk therapy is what's referred to as cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And in a nutshell, what CBT is the clinician is helping the client to identify their thoughts and how their thoughts are affecting their behaviors. Because often, especially when trauma is involved, there's a lot of feeling, there's a lot of emotion, whether those emotions are repressed and a person feels frozen, or, there's an exploding as opposed to imploding. The client will often think, well, this is how I feel, and they'll feel like they'll believe that they are, in a sense, a victim of their own feelings, when in fact, thoughts precede feelings. Feelings are a result of thoughts. And with CBT, what I help the client do is I said, picture like a big table in front of us. And what we're doing is we're kind of spreading everything out here and taking a look at what's going on. And we're looking for what are the faulty thoughts that you have about yourself, about your relationship, about the abuse you experienced, about your future. I help them to identify those faulty thoughts and work through what is the truth in this. And if the person I'm working with is a believer, that also opens up to a very important aspect of healing, and that is, what does God say? What does He say about you? Your abusive partner may have said, like in my case, I'm damaged goods. No one's ever going to want you. You're damaged goods. I heard that for years. You hear something like that, you will come to believe it in most cases. So in my own therapy, I had to really work through, what do I think about myself? Do I believe I'm damaged goods? Does God see me as damaged goods? And if not, then who am I really? And identifying what those truths are and replacing those faulty thinking.
So when we look and we embrace, talking about a believer, biblical truth, in this conversation of how do we break the connection between self-definition and how others define us, and then move towards a God-centered definition of what does God say about us versus what does this abusive partner say about us. In the process, I can see where if somebody who says, I love you, but you're damaged goods, you're this, you're that, you're this, you're that, I would think that in that abusive situation, almost the voice of God would be cut off, you almost have to shut off one source in order to be able to hear another source. And that's something that takes time in order to silence. It's like silencing the enemy's voice, discerning between whether or not it's the enemy. In this case, the enemy happens to be in the form of a loved one, a relative, a parent, a grandparent, a spouse, a sibling, a coworker. It could be take the shape of a lot of different people. A board member, and they're telling you one thing, but God has something different to say about you. How do you you get an hour with you, and then you spend the next? It's like going to church on Sunday. You go to the worship, you hear the sermon, you feel changed, but then reality smacks you in the face on Monday, and you tend to slip back because you don't have complete ownership of that new identity. So this is a process. This is not a quick fix. And I think people need to understand that this process is doing exactly that. It's taking man's definition and moving you into God's definition. What is, if there could be an average of how long it's going to take someone to, is it so individualized that there's no statistical data, or is there a way to kind of set an expectation as to when I might see or feel improvement?
That's a great question. I believe that's one of the reasons when the Lord gave me the title of the book, Healing Well and Living Free. It's ing, present tense. Mm-hmm. So yes, it is a process. And to me, it's in a sense a lifelong process, because abuse does change us.
Yes,
it does have it leaves its imprint, but it doesn't have to destroy us. And if anything, it can make us stronger. God will use that experience to make you stronger. But certainly, it's not an overnight fix. I mean, I personally worked with 3 different counselors. My first counselor, she really gave me the language to call it what it is. For the first time, I realized it had a name, and it's called abuse. My second counselor, we ended up moving, and so geographically I couldn't drive all the way to her office. It was way too far. So my second counselor, he really helped me grow a backbone. And what I mean by that is he helped me get to that place where I said enough, where I began to realize that my value and my safety mattered more than saving this marriage. And the first counselor was a believer. Second counselor was not at that time. Hopefully he is now. And my third one, I knew that I was at a place where I wanted to begin to work through the whole aspect of forgiveness. And not that the second gentleman couldn't, but without the Lord, that lacks the what I believe you need and who you need to be able to forgive. And so I found my third therapist who helped me work through that piece of forgiving myself, forgiving people who didn't believe me, and forgiving Ben.
In that process of forgiveness, was that your real freeing moment?
It was part of it, but my real freeing moment, believe it or not, was way in the beginning when I realized that in my introduction, it's called Something Broke Inside Me. And it's when I realized that Ben was trying to, quote, make up after he had done something horrific physically to me. And I just told him, I said, I just can't this time. And he said, well, why not? And I said, well, something broke inside me. There was a shift in that moment where I realized that I just couldn't go on and try to make this work. But that it may sound to some like that's a time of defeat, but for me, it was a time really of victory, of realizing I need to shift my energy away from trying to help this person change and really partner with God to get up, get out, and heal from this. But yes, forgiveness was certainly freeing, and I believe to heal well as opposed to heal, and I do believe there's a huge difference. To heal well, forgiveness has to be at some point a part of that. But that is on that person's, in a sense, timeline. It's not for me to say you should forgive, you need to forgive now. I will explain to people that in order to really truly be free, that that's something that they're going to have to eventually face, even though they may not feel like it. But it's not for me to say, you should do this. I'm very careful about the should word. I suggest it. I tell them why I believe it's a part of healing well and ultimately them being free of this, the effects of it. But I don't try to talk them into it. I'm more of a supportive. I come from a supportive position rather than a directive.
So, part of the role of the therapist is encourager, uplifter, guider. This mental change that takes place, you have to help rewire it and help guide them through that process of rewiring those brain synapses and how they process information. That's very technical.
It's technical, but it's not, because to me, the one who does ultimately the rewiring is the Holy Spirit, because that's his job to assist us in renewing our minds. And so, but what I do for my clients, regardless if they know the Lord or they do not, I pray before I set foot into my office. I've done it for 20 years. I always ask the Lord to help me see what he sees, hear what he hears, and feel what he feels for each client I work with. And so I don't feel the responsibility of having to, in a sense, fix them, because I know who the ultimate fixer, healer, repair, restorer is. And so I always pray for them. I've had atheists and agnostic clients that I've worked with, and on occasion I have shared with them, I do pray for you. I pray for you guys. That's a big part of what I do. And I've never had a single client in all my years say, please don't do that. Even the ones that allegedly don't believe that God exists. So that's a big part, is the behind the scenes. And for me, I've always also, Rabbi, I always keep an extra chair in my office, and I ask the Lord, I say, Jesus, please come sit here with us. And so when I'm in a particularly challenging situation with a client, because I'm human, I don't have like a magic wand, I always remind myself, the Lord is here. He walked in with them. He's going to walk out with them. He's here right now. So it's not really, I take that pressure off myself.
So I go through these therapy sessions with you. I talk to you. We identify some behavior and thought process modifications that I can make in your particular specialty area, which is abuse. Is it more often than not that there cannot be reconciliation between the parties?
Oh, such a good question. Thank you for asking it. Typically not. Between 1% and 3% of abusers actually do the deep work of changing. And that's not my statistic. That's from the Family and Child Abuse Prevention Center. They actually say only 1% of abusers change. I found some other research that said it could be up to 3%. But it's not something that's, anything significant, that's for sure. Because the use of power and control to leverage that in a relationship has a lot of gains. And they don't want to give that up. They don't want to forfeit that. And they externalize responsibility. It's their partner's fault. Their partner made them behave this way. It's their boss. It's whatever. There's always some sort of reason besides I chose to abuse. So the idea of them changing is pretty slim. And I share that with people because most people don't realize, until I started doing research on this topic, I had no clue how low it is. Now, of course, there is that small percentage that will, but there are things that a person can look for to actually see if their partner is doing the deep work of changing. And I actually have that in my book and on my website. There's benchmarks to look for. Just saying, well, I'm changing, and for you to assume they are is ridiculous. I think it's very important to be able to see objective markers that change is taking place.
So this is fascinating to me because 99% of the people that walk through your door who are married are ultimately going to wind up being divorced.
Well, the stats are high. Are you saying because of the 1%? Is that what you're?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Primarily, 1 to 3. So not between 97 and 99% of the people that seek out
It
counsel.
doesn't mean they're going to be divorced. That mean what that statistic is how many abusers actually change. Only 1% of abusers actually change. Now that couple could stay together.
So, but you're not in the business of teaching them coping mechanisms as to how to cope with
No,
being abused.
no.
Right.
I am in the business of teaching them how to heal
Right.
from this because reconciliation requires two people. Forgiveness only requires one. I did not need Ben, and he never did own what he did or take responsibility for it at all. If my being free was contingent on Ben taking responsibility, then I would be stuck. If I thought that withholding forgiveness somehow kept me safe, it wouldn't keep me safe, it would keep me stuck. So unforgiveness is basically how we can hang ourselves. It's how we wall ourselves in. It doesn't protect us from future harm. So forgiveness is about me. It's not about the perpetrator. Reconciliation, on the other hand, does require two people. But like I said, so few change, so reconciliation is not likely in these types of situations. It's very highly unlikely.
Is that a reality that comes to people over time as they spend more time with you? Is that something they come in hopeful that they will be able to cope, and they begin to realize that the real work needs to be done to heal? And in order to heal, you can't heal a black eye that gets punched every Friday.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Right. We don't change abuse, we leave abuse. I had someone ask me one time, well, can't I learn to manage it? And my response to this person is, why would you want to? Why would you want to? There's a faulty thinking because there's this concept of what's referred to as super traits. And super traits are basically elevated levels of empathy, loyalty, and tolerance, and a sense of over responsibility. And those of us who have these elevated qualities, we are at a greater risk for staying in a harmful relationship and trying to make it work. We believe we're part of the answer for them to change, when in fact that is not true. And so as I explain this to people, of course there's grief that sets in when that realization, wow, you mean to tell me there's nothing I can do to help them change? Well, if that were the case, it would have happened, because most people by the time they get to my office have flipped over every rock, or close to it. And so really explaining to them that you're going to be experiencing grief because it's the loss of what you hoped it could be. And that's tough. That needs time, that needs support, that needs, I teach them how to grieve in a healthy way. There are ways that we grieve we just try to run ahead of our grief, but it's just like an avalanche. It will catch up to you. We have to feel it. We have to talk through it. We have to acknowledge it. We have to sort out the faulty beliefs. There's a lot that goes into grieving well.
Well, we've covered a lot in this segment, and unfortunately we've run out of time, but the conversation has been with Dr. Ramona Probasco, author of the book Healing Well and Living Free from an Abusive Relationship, From Victim to Survivor to Overcomer. You can find her at healingwellandlivingfree.com, On there are some tools, some assessment tools, and some information for you to be able to take a look at your situation, your circumstance, and see whether or not you are in an abusive relationship and whether or not you need, if you are in an abusive relationship, you need help. That is 100% of the time, if you're in an abusive relationship, you need help. It's not a maybe, it is a definite, and certainly prayer and a strong foundation of faith is going to sustain you, but there are things you need to do to heal well and to live free. Jesus came to bind up the brokenhearted and set the captive free. If that wasn't the human condition, he wouldn't have come to do it. So we know that it's a reality of the Bible that there are those that are held captive, there are those that are brokenhearted, and he came to bring forth healing well, not just coping well. And that is the message of Dr. Ramona Probasco, and why we have her on here on Revealing the Truth on the third Monday of every month at the 11 o'clock hour. We wish you and your family a very happy and healthy and joyful New Year, a very Merry Christmas, and we appreciate you so very much and what you contribute to the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi. Merry Christmas to you, and Happy New Year, and I look forward to talking with you in January.
Thank you. God bless. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.